Well, which Seawolves shall we start with? We'll start with football.
Yeah,
because
let's address the elephant in the room, right?
And it is quite the elephant in the room because the football team is looking for its first win. And Anthony, you called it with Heath Kalb and Rhode Island, CAA opponent, long winning streak against these guys, and they come back with a loss.
Yeah, and here's the thing, too. Both teams played pretty well for the most part. Stony Brook, especially in that first quarter, they had all the momentum. Tyson Lawton, I will be mentioning his name a lot when we talk about this game. He had the best game of his career. Both him and the other running back for Rhode Island, Justice Antrim, both of them combined, absolutely sensational. They weren't the issue on either side. With Stony Brook, they were just unable to get these key stops down the stretch.
Yeah.
In overtime, it only took Rhode Island 2 plays to get into the end zone. Caleb Warren with that huge walk-off touchdown. And then in their possession in overtime for Stony Brook, just unable to get the quarterback sneaker with Tykel Fields. And both teams playing pretty well. But after that first quarter, Rhode Island was able to run away with all the momentum in that game.
Yeah, they're how would you put this kindly? They're flawed situationally, right? 5 for 15 on third down. That's horrible, right? They got 11 third down stops defensively, but only a 45%. Right? That's not good enough, right? 9 for 20. That's not good enough. They were on the field too much defensively. They weren't on the field enough offensively. Thank you for mentioning Tyson Lawton because we talk about him every week now. He's the best player on this team. No close second, right? I mean, can we all agree on that? He is the most valuable player on this team. He's on pace for 935 yards this year. He scored in 4 out of 5 games, 425 or 435 yards now, averaging over 5 yards a pop. He's a beast. I don't know. If he's going to give them that kind of an effort and they're still not going to win, I don't know how they're going to win.
Now, let's be fair. We're looking for our first CAA. Of course, the Seawolves did beat Colgate earlier this season for the win that's on their 1-4 record. 27-20 the final, but they had an opportunity at the end of regulation, tied at 20, and Rhode Island was able to pull it out as well. But Rhode Island, let's be fair, Rhode Island's a different team than the team that we had known up to this point where the Seawolves had racked up such a long winning streak. So they're ranked 21st or 23rd, depending on the FCS poll you follow, and they showed that they belong there. They're undefeated. They're 4-0. They're 2-0 in conference right now.
That's right.
And yes, you can that this is a much tougher team than the Seawolves have faced in the past, but the bottom line is that this game was winnable.
Oh, yeah. I mean, realistically, this was perhaps the best game we've seen them play. I mean, I guess that depends on how you feel about their Week 1 performance against New Hampshire. But, I mean, they went at the end of regulation, they didn't lose. So I guess technically that would make this the best game that they've played all year. They were in it, for certain, but there's no passing threat on this offense. 101 passing yards as a team.
This team for Stony Brook is predominantly based on the run. And when you are one-dimensional and only relying on that ground game, you're not going to be able to win football games.
No, they're too vanilla.
We saw it last week even against Fordham. When Tyson Lawton was not on the field, they only had 7 carries in that game.
Right, and
they relied
6 yards a carry, too.
Exactly. They apparently relied only on Stephen Niquette and Roland Dempster, and they did not win that game, and it wasn't even close.
No. Niquette actually did what he could, right? He had both their touchdowns. I think he had 79 all-purpose yards and 16 touches. He had a decent game, but he's no Tyson Lawton. Right,
Agreed.
And also, even if he is a Tyson Lawton, what does that mean if you can't throw the football? What was Tykel Fields? He was like 9 of 19 for a $101 and a pick, right?
Yeah,
that was his final line.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, that's you're not going to win any games. Doesn't matter that he scored 2 rushing touchdowns, right? Because he was set up by Tyson Lawton. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, agreed. And the funny thing is about the Seawolves, I was mentioning this during the broadcast. Every game Tykel Fields has thrown at least 1 interception, the Seawolves have lost the game.
Right.
So in order for Stony Brook to win potential games in the future, they need Tykel Fields to play a clean game.
Exactly.
Yes, penalties. Look, we were going to be talking about in the second hour as well about penalties.
Oh, yeah.
We're going to be talking about it all through. Penalties are the mark of an inexperienced team and an undisciplined team.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I remember one play in the game where they were about to get off the field, and then I forget if it was on in sports for conduct penalty or it was some weird penalty where there was offside.
And those
or
are the
whatever.
worst.
Yeah, and they were in New Hampshire, or not New Hampshire.
They're mental errors.
Rhode Island was able to get a new set of downs off of those penalties and able to score touchdowns off of that.
Ask any coach about physical versus mental errors. Physical error is dropping a ball.
Yeah.
Mental error is being in the wrong place or being in the wrong coverage or not picking up or not picking up signals and things like that.
Yeah, 12 men in the huddle, all that stuff.
In baseball, throwing to the wrong base, things like that. Those are mental errors, and coaches hate mental errors.
And the sad thing too is I feel like this is a broken record because you can go back to the 2019 season and we were saying the same thing about errors, how certain guys, Stony Brook would get a stop and certain guys would take it to that next level and all of a sudden personal foul, unsportsmanlike conduct or celebrating or taunting and the other team gets a fresh set of first downs. I mean, just looking at the stats, this Stony Brook team does not lead in many categories, but one category they do lead in the CAA is penalties. They have 41 through their first 5 games. The only team with 40 or more is averaging or a total of 303 yards and averaging about 60 yards a game. You're essentially giving your opponent half the field already with the amount of penalties and lack of discipline showcased on the gridiron, guys.
Let me put it this way, guys. I don't know, of course, I don't know about Chuck Priori's health. He looks like a very healthy guy, okay? Especially for his age. But I'll tell you this. I am sure they got to monitor his blood pressure.
Yeah.
When people make when people rack up penalties like that. Yeah. And I'm not saying that he's particularly vulnerable to it. I'd say anybody would be vulnerable to it because that, again, it just makes people explode. And especially veteran coaches, because the perfect example, going back to the NFL, and we're talking about the 1970s and the then Redskins under Coach George Allen had a bunch of veteran players. The average age was like 10 years older than everybody else. But the answer to it was that these guys made fewer mistakes. Mm-hmm. And veteran players, as a general rule, your seniors as opposed to your freshmen, you have a young team, you basically live with it until they learn. And generally over the course of a year, they do. And that's the other thing. We're getting close to mid-year. We are at mid-year. Yeah. Okay? And the mistakes aren't going down.
No, and they're not exactly a young team either. I mean, all these guys, most of these guys, at least they're, the featured players, redshirt junior, redshirt senior, graduate student, these guys have enough experience under their belt to where they shouldn't be handing Rhode Island victories. You can't spot a team like Rhode Island any extra yards to begin with, and that's got to stop. That's got to stop from here on out.
And if you're on the other side and you know these guys are vulnerable to it, you're going to push buttons. Mm-hmm. You're going to trash talk. You're going to taunt. You're going to do all those things. And if they don't see that coming, they react to it, 5 yards, 10, 15, and it just keeps racking up.
And they got 2 or 3 against those last week, too, against Fordham at home. So they are definitely susceptible. It is an emotional issue of this team. And, there's an old adage in football. I'm probably going to screw it up, but for every 100 yards of penalties, you cost yourself 7 points. Now, of course, that could be in either direction. You take 7 points off the board from yourself, or you spot the other team 7 points. Doesn't make a difference. It's still, net loss of 7. And that's...
If you're racking up 100 yards of penalties in a game, you're not going to win it anyway.
No.
And you're not spotting 7. You may be spotting more than that. I would change that. Again, this is strictly opinion, and it's just an adage, to maybe 50.
So you're saying it needs to be updated? It needs to be adjusted for inflation?
Yeah. I think if you, Ken, I think you would agree with this too. 50 yards of penalties could cost you 7 points.
I'd say 60 because that's what Stony Brook's averaging now, and they're giving up.
And it's emblematic, yeah.
So, what do you do? I mean, you practice, you drill, you do all these things, but here's the thing, and we're going to get into this because with the Yankees, and as when we get to them, because I'm part of a Facebook group that's run by a former Yankee from the 1970s by the name of Ron Blomberg. Now, Blomberg, his claim to fame is that he is the first ever designated hitter. Because in 1973, when the American League adopted the DH, the Yankees, I think, started on opening day earlier than everybody else, and they had Blomberg in the lineup, so he's the first DH. And of course, he was part of the Yankee teams in the 70s and played with guys like Thurman Munson and Bobby Mercer, guys you do know. And but it's become a pretty active forum. And the latest knock, and again, we'll spend more time on this, is lack of hustle of this current Yankee team and lack of attentiveness and, again, mental errors. So what do you do? And who is responsible? Yes, the coaches take responsibility for the guys making mental errors. They take responsibility for everything. The buck stops with them. But how do you address them? Yes, partially coaching, but partially peer pressure. The veterans are the ones that have to tell the freshmen to, step it up, get back in line.
Yeah, that's true. But what if it's not the freshmen making the mistakes?
Yes,
then that's
the
the other.
And
then
that snowballs, and then you get what you got right now.
Yeah, exactly.
But you got to break it. You got to stop it somehow, because you know what else? The upside to this is if you do correct it, you'll get some wins.
Yeah, right, exactly. And they're 1-4 right now, 3-game losing streak. 0-2 in CAA play, or 0-3 now?
0-2 in CAA.
0-2, okay. Yeah, and then they play who now next week? It's not Towson, is it?
It is.
It is
at Towson at Johnny Unitas Stadium. And that's a fun place. I mean, first of all, it's named for Johnny Unitas. But I did a lacrosse game down there one year, and I've done a football game down there, and it's a nice facility, and whoever ends up doing it this week, and we'll let you know who that's going to be. But that person will have a good time, I think, with this game, especially if the Seawolves can pull out a win, because there's another thing about Towson that they don't have to worry about anymore. A quarterback named Flacco, right? Or is he still there?
You're not talking
No, he graduated.
Joe Flacco.
No, Tom Flacco, his brother.
Yep, graduated during the pandemic.
But pretty good. Really good quarterback. And the last time we were down there, he picked us apart.
Yeah.
And like Joe.
Right, yeah.
But the funny thing is that he played at Towson when his brother's playing in Baltimore. So,
oh, yeah?
Yeah. But, his younger brother, I believe, did he get drafted? I believe he did.
I don't think so. I feel like
oh, that's right. You're right. He did not, and that was the bone of contention, because we thought he was good enough to be. I mean, he impressed us.
Well, yeah, I guess we got to see him, so we were implicitly biased towards him. I was a big Joe Flacco guy when he was with the Ravens, so I think I would have probably heard a little bit more about that. I mean, I was ecstatic when the Jets brought him in to back up Sam.
But down there, I mean, everybody was going nuts. His kid brother is actually lighting it up for a local school, which is a lot of fun. I think for them. Not so much fun for us because he ate us alive. But
is Joe Flacco elite? Are we still debating that?
Is Eli Manning elite? Are we still debating that?
Good question.
Depends on who you ask.
Brady or Manning.
But guys, speaking of which, the Seawolves are in a situation where it kind of reminds me, and I hate to even mention this, it does remind me of the D3 era when D3 quarterbacks, especially back in those days, were very hard to find. Because if anybody was any good, he was D2 or higher. Mm-hmm. So there was a guy in our late D3 era before we upgraded to D2 and then to D1. We did have a decent quarterback for a couple of years in the early 90s by the name of Tim Schroeder, who we kind of lucked into. But for the most part, your offensive players, trying to find somebody who would compete on the D3 level was no mean trick. And it's gotten better. As a general rule, I think the athletes have gotten better since those days. And, you can see D3 players who can dunk in basketball. Unthinkable back in the 80s. Mm-hmm. So I do think that the quality of the play has gotten better even on the lower levels of college sports.
Oh, yeah.
But the fact of the matter is, you're not competing in FCS without a quarterback that can at least take care of the ball and draw some attention away from the running game.
Yeah.
And they don't even have that. I mean, look, Phil Simms and Jeff Hostetler, perfect examples of those first two championship giant teams.
86 and 90.
Neither one's in the Hall of Fame.
No.
Okay? But what happened with them is that Jim Fossil, believe it or not,
yes,
the late, great Jim Fossil, was the quarterback's coach. And what he made out of those two guys was guys who took care of the ball. And they had great running backs. They had Otis Anderson and Joe Morris. They definitely had a balanced attack that was based on time of possession because the defense drove the bus.
Yes, right. I mean, the 86 Giants,
Lawrence Taylor.
They draw some comparisons.
Everybody knows who Lawrence Taylor was.
Oh,
okay?
yeah. A lot of people say he's the greatest defensive player to walk the earth. Some people list him as number 3 when they list greatest players ever. They'll say like Jerry Rice, Jim Brown, and then Lawrence Taylor.
But the funny thing about it is that when Lawrence Taylor joined that team, the defense was always already pretty good.
Yep.
And we're going to be talking about this malaise era, okay, in the NFL. And the Giants in the late 1970s going into the 80s, when they started to turn it around, had a good defense, but their offense was pitiful. Mm-hmm. As a matter of fact, it was called the prevent offense. It just,
that's right,
it undermined them so badly. That's what you don't want to see here with Stony Brook. You don't want the offense to undermine the defense. But on the flip side of things, penalties are being committed on both sides of the ball.
Oh, yeah, and special teams, too. They're covering all 3 phases. So, yeah. Special teams, by the way, special teams can win a game. Special teams, more often than not, loses a game. This particular time, he doesn't deserve all the blame. They lost the game in many other areas other than this one play. But Angelo Guglielmo missing that extra point changes the complexity of the game. Because it's 21-20 at the end of regulation.
Extra
There's no
points
overtime.
Need to be automatic.
They have to, in college especially, right?
But in D3 they weren't.
No.
Oh, that's another two players, two positions that were very hard to fill back in those days in D3: quarterback and kicker.
Yeah.
Again,
sometimes the same player.
But you know what? We had one guy who was a great punter, and he actually set an NCAA record for punting average. And not only he didn't get drafted, but he almost got signed by a couple of NFL teams. He's a transfer from the University of Miami because he was behind Jeff Fiegels. This is a guy who you are familiar with.
Yes,
had a nice long career. Mm-hmm. But the guy ended up transferring to Stony Brook. So again, we lucked into, and that's usually what happened in those days and in the early D1 days. You would luck into a guy who was either overlooked or was behind too many starters at a D1 school and would transfer and become a star with you.
Yeah. Well, it should be noted that our punter, Mitchell Wright, kind of, he was the second best player on Saturday. So
yeah, but you want to know something?
Well, you know what? No, that's not true. That's not true.
The two best players on the Giants in those days were Joe Danello, the kicker, and Sean Landetta, the punter.
Yeah, well, right. The old Sebastian Janikowski, Shane Leckler duo in Oakland. Yeah. Who's the defensive tackle? He had a monster game, and if I were good at my job, I'd know his name off the top of my head. It was Lopez. Brandon Lopez. Brandon Lopez was a monster on Saturday. 3.5 tackles for loss, shared a half sack with I think it was Mekhi Smith. No, it wasn't. It was the cornerback. Mekhi Smith and Tyler King also shared a half sack. So 2 sacks across 4 players. Kind of hard.
These are things to build on.
Right. Yeah. Kind of hard to remember when 2 sacks are shared across 4 players who had which sack. But yeah, Brandon Lopez, he was a monster. His stock is up. Tyler King has been a monster all year. Led the team with 8 tackles, broke up a pass, shared a half sack. some good things to build on, obviously. And the defense, again, they only allowed 20 points by the end of regulation. They needed a fifth quarter to get to that 27. So the defense played well enough to win that game, I thought. So
yeah, but here's the thing, though. I was just doing this really quickly. Over the last 3 games, in the second half alone, Stony Brook has been outscored 75-20. Yeah. A 55-point difference. The 13 points in that number only coming against the team that they just played, Rhode Island. So, honestly, their offense has just not been able to get anything going in that second half. That's ultimately why they end up losing a lot of these games. Like, even against Oregon, obviously they weren't expected to win that game, but end of the first half, they were only down 10 points. So it was a manageable game, but then they just blew the game open, and that was that. So if you're Stony Brook, especially going into the back half of your schedule, yes, the defense needs to be consistent. Yes, you need to get your kicking game in order. But offensively, you have to rely on someone else besides Tyson Lyon because he can't be the only guy getting it going for you offensively. Obviously, Tykel Fields, he is the quarterback. He needs to make plays with both his arm and his leg. But also, the other receivers, they need to get involved as well.
Right.
Sean Harris Jr., the deep threat.
Yeah,
was basically not there on the field against Rhode Island in that game.
Right.
And, even though Delonte Helms Jr. had a few great catches against Rhode Island, he's also another one that needs to get involved here for Stony
Right.
Brook.
Consistency.
Yeah, and Khalil Newton's a stud. I do like Khalil Newton, but they've got to get him involved too. I mean, I don't know why he's not your leading receiver every single game. I like Delonte Helms, but they've got to spread the ball around. They've got to spread the ball around, and more than just one catch across 7 players. 3 here, 4 here, 2 here, 3 here. Get Tyson Lawton involved in the passing game, right? Take some pressure off him. Allow him to run out of bounds. He's taking too many hits. I'm getting worried about. He's like a quarterback behind a bad offensive line. He's taking too many hits, right? So they've got to protect him. But yeah, again, just it should be noted. I do believe that the defense is not a train wreck. I actually think that they're borderline good. Being put into bad situations by the offense, right? A lot of short fields, always on the field. But they've got to make a splash play because they have this many. 0. Nil, Matt.
Yeah.
They have 0 turnovers over the past 3 weeks.